Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to really get into the source material, pull out the core insights, and hopefully make them immediately useful for you.
Absolutely.
Today, we're making a really important shift in our journey through the Bhagavad Gita. We're moving from, the very high-level philosophical concepts of Chapter 2.
The nature of the soul, reality itself.
Exactly, to the unavoidable stuff.
Yeah.
The day-to-day realities of action, which is what Chapter 3 is all about.
It's a crucial pivot. Because think about it, after Arjuna hears he's this eternal, unchanging soul in Chapter 2, he's left with this massive practical question.
Right. If I'm the soul, and the soul doesn't really do anything in a material sense, and if knowledge, buddhi, is better than chasing results,
Then why act at all? Why get my hands dirty? Especially in something as, frankly, dreadful as the war he's facing. Why not just, step back?
that's the core tension. So our source material today is purely Chapter 3 of the Gita, Karma Yoga, the yoga of action. And our mission really is to unpack these key ideas, action, karma, duty, dharma, and what real renunciation looks like, which, spoiler alert, isn't what you might think.
It's not about just stopping. Conscious point is much more profound. We're aiming to turn that Chapter 2 philosophy into, a user's manual for living effectively in the world.
And tackling that central paradox head on.
Mm.
If knowing is the goal, why work? Why not just find a quiet spot and wait for enlightenment?
Yeah, the appeal of the cave. But Kuncha's answer, which we'll explore deeply, is pretty radical. He says perfection isn't found by not working.
No.
It's found by transforming the why and the how behind the work. It's about renovating your consciousness, your motivation, not stopping the action, but changing the actor's mindset.
Changing the motivation, not the movement. I like that. Let's dive in.
Okay.
Okay, so let's pick up right where Chapter 2 ended. Arjuna is, he's confused. He feels like Kuna is giving him mixed messages.
Understandably so.
On one side, Kanchuru's praising knowledge, spiritual intelligence, this path of Sadhgukya, which sounds like withdrawal, like renunciation. But then, almost in the same breath, he's pushing Arjuna towards this horrific act of war.
Yeah, Arjuna literally asks, if you think intelligence is better than fruit of work, why are you engaging me in this ghastly warfare? He's basically saying pick a lane. He
Yeah.
clearly prefers what looks like renunciation, sannyasa.
He sees actions, especially this action, as just creating more entanglement, more bad karma. Killing family, that sounds like the worst possible action. So withdrawal seems like the only safe option.
And that's the classic misunderstanding Kanji needs to address immediately. The idea that action itself is the problem and inaction is the solution.
So how does Kintia clear this up? What's his first point about just renouncing work versus acting in a dedicated way?
Well, first, he acknowledges that both paths, renunciation of work, sannyasa, and work in devotion, karma yoga, can lead towards liberation. They're both valid in principle. But then he makes a very clear statement right there in verse 3.2. Karma yoga, work in devotion, is actually superior to just giving up fruit of work. Karma sannyasat, karma yoga vishyate.
Superior. Why?
Because, Current argues, true perfection isn't about just stopping the physical activity. And the reason it's not about stopping is, because you can't stop.
Hold on, what do you mean you can't stop? I could quit my job. I could go live in the woods. I could just sit still. Isn't that stopping?
According to Kanino, no, not really. He lays this out very clearly in verses 5 through 8. He says it's fundamentally impossible for anyone with a body to cease all action, even for a single moment.
Impossible. Why?
Because we are, and this is key, helplessly forced to act by the qualities or the modes of material nature, the gunas.
The gunas, goodness, passion, ignorance. We need to unpack these a bit. How do they force us to act, even if we're trying to be still?
Right, so the gunas are like the underlying energies or forces that make up everything in the material world, including our own psychology and physical bodies. They're always active, always influencing us.
So, goodness might make me want to study or help someone.
Yeah.
Ignorance might make me want to sleep or just zone out.
Exactly. But the real engine here, especially for action, is passion, rajas. It's the mode of desire, ambition, restlessness, activity.
The driving force.
The driving force.
Yeah.
As soon as a soul takes on a material body, it's plugged into this energy system.
Yeah.
So even if you sit down, restrain your arms, close your mouth, try to meditate,
Your mind's still going.
your mind is racing, your heart's beating, your lungs are breathing, your body's digesting, you're getting hungry, you're having thoughts, desires are popping up, all driven by the interplay of these gunas. It's action. You literally cannot turn off the machine while you're in it.
Okay, I see. So just stopping the external stuff doesn't stop the internal action or the potential for reaction from that internal action.
Precisely. So merely abstaining from your job or from speaking doesn't free you from karmic reaction. And renunciation by itself, without this deeper understanding and mental control, doesn't guarantee perfection.
So if someone tries that external renunciation, they go off grid, they wear the robes, but they haven't dealt with the internal pressure from the gunas. What happens then? This sounds like where Kanina's warning about the pretender comes in.
Exactly, the Mithyakara. Kina uses this term in verse 3.6, and it's a really powerful warning about, well, spiritual hypocrisy.
Let's look closely at this. What exactly makes someone a Mithyakara?
It's the person who manages to restrain the outer organs of action. They look pious, maybe they've retreated from society, they talk a good game about detachment, but internally, their mind is constantly, obsessively dwelling on sense objects.
So the hands are still, but the mind is still chasing money or pleasure or power or whatever it was they supposedly gave up.
Precisely. Kinta says this person is just fooling themselves. It's pure self-delusion. They've created an external facade of control, but inside the desires are still raging, still binding them just as tightly, maybe even more so because of the hypocrisy.
Wow. You can definitely see versions of that today, can't you? The person loudly proclaiming they're anti-materialist while secretly checking their investments every 5 minutes. Or the fitness guru who preaches discipline but privately struggles.
It's the gap between the external show and the internal reality. And the immediate takeaway for anyone listening is crystal clear. Real control has to be internal. The outer performance means nothing if the mind isn't detached. It's just wasted effort, self-deception.
So the real work isn't about changing your location or your clothes. It's about changing your mind.
The battlefield is internal. Kanen's point is that genuine detachment comes from acting with control, controlling the senses, detaching the mind while dedicating your actions to a higher purpose. You don't achieve it by just running away from the field of action.
Because you can't actually run away from action anyway.
You can't. So since you have to act, you need to learn to act in a way that liberates rather than binds. And that's the essence of karma yoga.
Okay, so if inaction is impossible and pretending to be inactive is hypocrisy, we're left with action. But Keen says there's a specific way to act that avoids entanglement. And that way is yajna.
Yes, yajna. Now, usually this gets translated as sacrifice, and people think of, fire rituals and ancient ceremonies.
Right, pouring ghee into a fire.
Exactly. But Keensa defines yajna much more broadly here. It's basically prescribed work done as an offering, specifically for the satisfaction of the supreme, within, or you could say for the benefit of the entire cosmic system. It's action performed without selfish motive.
It's the key to acting without getting bound by the results, like a spiritual lubricant for the gears of karma.
That's a good way to put it. It allows the necessary actions of life to happen without creating that sticky residue of karmic reaction. And Keaton grounds this idea right back in the creation itself. In verse 3.10, he says the Creator sent forth beings along with yajna, telling them essentially, prosper through this yajna because performing it will grant you all you need.
So it's built into the system, like a kind of divine arrangement or a cosmic social contract.
Exactly. It establishes this interdependence. Kin explains that our prosperity, our ability to even survive, doesn't just depend on our own individual scrambling for resources. It depends on a larger, divinely ordained system. Think about rain, sunshine, fertile soil. These are governed by natural laws and forces, which the Gita personifies as demigods who are sustained by our yajna.
So when we perform our work as yajna, as an offering without selfish attachment,
we're essentially contributing back to that system. We're acknowledging the source, showing gratitude, and keeping the cycle, the kakram, Kid calls it, moving. The yajna pleases the universal administrators. They ensure the rain falls, the rain produces food, the food sustains us. It's a virtuous cycle.
And if we break that cycle, if we just take and consume without offering back, without that spirit of yajna,
then, Akin says quite bluntly in verse 12, we're thieves. We're enjoying the benefits provided by the system without contributing our part, without acknowledging the provider.
That's a stark contrast to the purely selfish approach to work. The source material seems pretty strong on this point.
Oh, definitely. Kana directly contrasts the person acting in the spirit of yajna with the one who ignores the system and just focuses on their own sense gratification, indriyarama.
The pleasure seeker.
Right. That person, Kana states in verse 3.16, lives a life of sin and basically lives in vain. Their efforts don't contribute to the cosmic order, they just lead to further entanglement for themselves. He criticizes what he calls the Mammonist philosophy, just work hard solely so you can enjoy more sense pleasure. That disrupts the whole balance.
So let's try to modernize this. Forget literal rain and crops for a moment. Think about a complex system we all understand, like a company or maybe even society as a whole. How does Yanya function there, like a team cycle?
That's a perfect analogy. In a functional company, every department, every individual has their role, their specific duty. That's their Yanya. The engineer needs to build a good product, not just for their paycheck, but for the customer, for the company's purpose. Marketing needs to communicate honestly. Support needs to help genuinely.
Right.
If everyone is just focused on maximizing their own personal gain, cutting corners, only thinking about their bonus or promotion, their Indriya Rama, what happens?
The product suffers, trust breaks down, the customers leave, the company eventually fails.
Exactly. The whole system collapses. But when everyone performs their duty with integrity, contributing to the larger goal, the supreme whole of that company, you could say, then the company thrives. And interestingly, individual needs tend to get met more effectively and sustainably anyway.
So Karma Yoga, acting with this Yanya spirit, isn't necessarily about becoming some desireless saint overnight. It actually provides a way for people with desires, which is most of us, to act without getting burned.
Precisely. It's a path of purification. You still work, you still meet your needs and your family's needs, but you transform the quality of that action by changing the intention behind it. You dedicate the result. You act because it's your duty, your contribution, not just for what you can personally squeeze out of it.
The action itself becomes a spiritual practice.
Yes. It takes a potential source of bondage work and turns it into a means of liberation. It meets us right where we are, living embodied lives, needing to act, and gives us a way to do it constructively. That's why it kind of rates it higher than just trying to stop acting altogether.
So it's about aligning our necessary actions with the flow of the universe, becoming part of the solution, not part of the problem.
And recognizing that we're constantly benefiting from a larger system and that our work can be our way of acknowledging and contributing back to that. That mindset shift is fundamental.
Okay, the philosophy is compelling, act without attachment, act as Yanya. But now we need examples. How does this look at a real person's life? And he gives us a big one. King Janaka.
Yes, King Janaka is crucial here. He's presented as someone who reached perfection, Sasadam, simply through performing his work. Karmatnyeva, he's Sasadam 3.2 now. This wasn't some hermit in the Himalayas. This was a king, a major political leader with huge responsibilities.
Right, running a kingdom. So he proves that intense worldly engagement and spiritual perfection aren't mutually exclusive.
Exactly. He's the model karma yogi in action. He worked, yes, but the key was his motivation. He wasn't working for his own power or wealth. His primary driver, the source says, was locus sogram.
Locus sogram, what does that translate to, roughly?
It means working for the welfare, the upliftment, the education, the general maintenance of the people, basically acting for the common good.
That has huge implications for leadership, doesn't it? Case points out that whatever great people do, others follow. If a leader like Janaka were to suddenly drop everything and say, I'm off to meditate, what happens?
Chaos. The common people who look up to him might imitate the action of abandoning duty, but they wouldn't necessarily have the internal spiritual realization to back it up. They'd just stop doing their jobs properly, society would fray, and it would actually harm people.
So leaders have a responsibility not just to be good, but to demonstrate responsible action.
They set the standard. Their actions ripple outwards. Kana underscores this by using himself as the ultimate example.
Right, he says, even he, the Supreme Lord, works constantly and diligently, atantrita, to uphold dharma, the principles of religion and cosmic order. Why?
Because, as he says in verse 3.23, if he were to stop, everyone would follow his example, leading to widespread confusion, sakura, and ultimately the breakdown of society.
But this brings up a really important point you mentioned earlier, the difference between following Kana's teachings and trying to imitate his specific actions.
Absolutely critical distinction. We are meant to follow the principles. He teaches act without attachment, work for the whole, perform our duty. We're not meant to try and imitate his divine activities like lifting Govardhana on a hill or multiplying himself. That's his unique role. We follow the instruction, not the superhuman feat.
Okay. And this emphasis on doing one's duty brings us back squarely to Svadharma, one's own prescribed duty. For Arjuna, that meant fighting as a Kshatriya, a warrior. Avoiding that, even for seemingly pious reasons, was wrong for him.
Right, and we need to be careful here with the modern understanding. The Gina isn't necessarily talking about rigid, birth-based castes in the way they later became distorted. It links duties, karma, more to a person's inherent qualities and psychophysical nature, which are influenced by those gunas we talked about.
So Svadharma is more about your natural aptitude, your inherent psychophysical makeup, than just the family you were born into.
That's the deeper understanding presented. A person predominantly influenced by the mode of goodness, sattva, will naturally have qualities suited for intellectual or advisory roles traditionally, the brahmana. Someone with more passion, rajas, tempered by goodness, might be suited for leadership or protection, like the kshatriya. The idea is that society functions best when people engage in work that aligns with their natural capabilities and inclinations.
Let's use that artist versus finance person analogy again. How does Svadharma play out there?
Okay, so imagine someone with a natural talent and temperament for meticulous, creative work. Maybe an artist or writer, a craftsperson. That's where their gunas lead them. That's their svadham. They find fulfillment in the process itself.
Their yajna is creation performed well.
Exactly. According to Karma Yoga, they should focus on mastering that, doing it as an offering, without being solely attached to becoming, say, wildly rich from it, which might be more typical in another field.
But then they see someone in, say, high finance making a fortune, and they think, maybe I should do that instead, even though it doesn't suit their nature at all.
Right. They abandon their svadharma, driven by the desire for a particular result, money, and force themselves into a role that might require, say, aggressive competition or abstract analysis that goes against their grain.
What happens then?
It often leads to misery, stress, burnout, even if they make the money. They're fighting their own nature. Kinsa explicitly says in verse 3.35 that it's better to do your own duty, even if you do it imperfectly, than to try and perfectly perform someone else's duty. Performing duty foreign to your nature is dangerous.
That's a huge challenge, though. If I'm supposed to work tirelessly for the common good, like Janaka, how do I avoid just being exploited or burning out? That's a very real modern concern.
It is, and the answer lies in the detachment aspect of karma yoga. Burnout doesn't usually come from the work itself, but from our intense emotional investment in the results of the work. The success, the recognition, the rewards. Janaka worked tirelessly as king, performing the duties. But he wasn't attached to being king, to the power, the praise, or even the specific outcomes. He did the work as an offering, dedicated the results to the supreme or the common good. When you detach from the fruit, you remove the primary source of anxiety and emotional exhaustion that leads to burnout. It allows for sustained, dedicated action without self-destruction.
So the energy comes from fulfilling the duty, not from clinging to the potential reward.
Precisely. And one last point in this section, which is quite subtle but important. Kanema warns the wise not to unnecessarily disturb the minds of those who are still very attached to fruitive results. Verse 3.26.
Meaning, don't just tell someone who's completely materially motivated to drop everything.
Yeah, basically. If someone is deeply invested in working for material rewards, abruptly telling them it's all pointless can just confuse or discourage them, maybe even make them give up regulated work altogether, which is worse. Instead, the wise person should act in an exemplary way themselves, showing how work can be done with detachment and dedication.
Lead by example. Show them the path gradually.
Exactly. Demonstrate how the fruits can be offered, how work can be purifying, rather than just condemning their current motivation. It's about gently guiding, not disrupting.
Okay, we've got the framework. Act. Don't be inactive or hypocritical. Act as yanja, according to your svadharma, without attachment. Follow the example of the wise. Sounds great. But then Arjuna asks the killer question, the one we all feel sometimes.
The really practical one.
Yeah. What is it that forces us to act sinfully, sometimes even when we don't want to, even when we know better? It feels like something is pushing us against our will. Where does that compulsion come from?
And Kanna's answer is direct, almost stark. He identifies the culprit in verse 3.37. It is lust, Kama.
Lust, just lust.
Lust, he says, is born from contact with the material mode of passion, rajas. And then he calls it the all-devouring, sinful enemy of this world.
So the root of sin isn't some external devil. It's an internal force. It's desire gone wrong.
Precisely. It's described as the pure, spiritual love of the soul becoming perverted or contaminated by contact with material nature, specifically the mode of passion. And this lust has a dangerous dynamic.
What's that?
When lust is fulfilled, it doesn't lead to satisfaction. It just breeds more greed, more wanting, maybe pride. But when it's not satisfied, when it's blocked,
Uh-oh.
it instantly transforms into wrath, krodha, anger, frustration, resentment.
Lust turning into anger. Yeah, I think we can all recognize that pattern.
It's a destructive cycle. Lust leads to frantic action, blocked lust leads to anger, anger leads to delusion, delusion leads to bewildered memory, and so on, dragging the soul deeper into entanglement. This lust-wrath combo is the internal enemy keeping us trapped.
So the real battle Arjuna needs to fight, the real battle we need to fight, isn't necessarily external, it's internal, against this force of kama. No wonder he was feeling overwhelmed. That sounds harder than fighting an army.
It absolutely is. And to show just how insidious and powerful this enemy is, Kala uses 3 analogies in verse 3.38 to illustrate how lust covers our true consciousness, our innate knowledge, like different layers of obscuration.
These are really vivid. Let's break them down. What's the first one?
First is fire covered by smoke. This is the mildest covering. You can still see the fire, the knowledge flickering through the smoke. It's obscured, but visible.
Okay. Like a mind distraction.
Yeah, representing maybe someone mostly in goodness, whose knowledge is just temporarily clouded by some small desire. A little effort, like blowing away the smoke, can reveal the fire again relatively easily.
Then it gets worse. The second is a mirror covered by dust.
Now the covering is thicker. The mirror's surface, which should reflect our true self, is completely obscured by a layer of dust. You can't see the reflection at all.
So knowledge is there, but inaccessible.
Right. It requires significant, deliberate effort, like thoroughly cleaning the mirror, to remove the dust and see clearly again. This represents someone more dominated by passion, where steady spiritual practice, like karma yoga, is needed over time to clear away the accumulated obscurations.
And the final, most intense analogy.
The embryo covered by the womb. This is total envelopment. The embryo, the soul's consciousness, is completely encased, helpless, entirely dependent, with no direct access to the outside light or knowledge.
Representing deep ignorance, tamas.
Exactly. A state of profound spiritual blindness where breaking free requires immense effort, maybe even external help or grace. It shows the different degrees of difficulty we face in overcoming lust, depending on how much we've let it cover our consciousness.
So we know the enemy, we know how it covers us, but where does it hide? Where are its headquarters, so to speak?
Kennan pinpoints them in verse 3.40. Lust takes shelter in the senses, the mind, and the intelligence.
The very tools we use to navigate the world.
Exactly. That's what makes it so tricky. Lust uses the senses to perceive attractive objects. It uses the mind to constantly think about and desire those objects. And then it uses the intelligence to rationalize why we should pursue them, even if it's harmful. It hijacks our own internal guidance system.
It uses our own faculties against us to keep us bewildered.
Right. It veils our real knowledge and pushes us into actions we might later regret.
Let's make this super practical. Use that chain of reaction from the Gita, contemplating objects leading to attachment, lust, then wrath, but apply it to something totally modern, like, say, scrolling social media or binge-watching a show.
Perfect example. So it starts with contemplating the sense objects, the autoyan. That's just picking up the phone, maybe scrolling idly or clicking play on the first episode. Innocent enough, perhaps.
Just looking?
Just looking. But that easily leads to attachment. You get drawn in. You start caring about the likes, the comments, the next plot twist, the cliffhanger. You're hooked.
Yeah, that feeling of needing to see what happens next.
And that attachment quickly escalates into laskama. Now, it's not just casual interest, it's a driving need. The compulsion to finish the whole season right now, the urge to check the phone constantly, the anxiety if you can't. It's that gotta have it feeling dominating your mind.
We've all been there.
And then the final stage. If that desire gets blocked, the internet goes down, the battery dies, someone interrupts you, asking you to do something else.
Boom. Wrath, krodha. Irritation, frustration, maybe even snapping at the person who interrupted you.
That's the cycle Kama described thousands of years ago, playing out right there on our screens. Lust denied becomes anger.
So the key is to intervene early.
Yeah.
Before contemplation turns into full-blown lust.
Yes. The strategy Ksham advises is first, regulate the senses from the very beginning. Control that initial input. Use your intelligence to guide the mind and senses. Don't just let them wander into tempting territory unchecked. Practice regulated freedom.
Okay, control the senses. But is there something even more effective?
There is. Kennan mentions this more in Chapter 2, but it's the ultimate solution here too. Cultivate a higher taste.
Paradisla.
Higher taste. If you engage your mind and senses in something genuinely more fulfilling, more spiritually satisfying, connecting with the Supreme, engaging in meaningful service, diving into deeper knowledge, then the appeal of those lower material or digital sense objects naturally fades.
Like, why would you want cheap candy if you've tasted gourmet chocolate?
Exactly. Why chase those fleeting, often frustrating material pleasures, the pale things, when you have access to a deeper, more lasting source of joy and satisfaction? Developing that higher taste through spiritual practice, like karma yoga done properly, is the most powerful way to conquer lust. It doesn't just suppress it, it makes it irrelevant. The mind becomes attracted to something better.
Hashtag tag tag outro.
Wow. So pulling it all together, this deep dive into Chapter 3 really connects the dots between the big philosophical ideas and our actual everyday lives. The core message of Karma Yoga seems incredibly practical. It really is. It boils down to this. Action itself isn't the problem binding us to this world. The problem is our attachment to the results of our actions, driven by that internal enemy, lust.
And Karma Yoga is the solution Kanna offers. It's a way to navigate the fact that we have to act because of the gunas, because we're alive, but to do so in a way that actually purifies us and leads to freedom.
Right. By shifting our work from being purely self-centered, driven by personal gain, indriya, to being an offering, a yajna, performed as a duty for the sake of the whole, or the Supreme.
And Kanna gives a strong promise, doesn't he? In verse 3.31, he says, if you perform your duties according to these principles faithfully, without envy.
You become completely free from the bondage of karma, from the reactions of your work. So real freedom isn't about stopping the machine of action. It's about learning to operate it consciously with the right intention so it runs smoothly without creating more friction and entanglement.
Changing the consciousness behind the controls.
Exactly. And that leads us to, I think, the final, very peaceful realization that karma yoga ultimately points towards. What's the state of the successful karma yogi?
They come to understand Kuta, or the Supreme, as the ultimate enjoyer of all sacrifices and austerities, the proprietor of everything, and the true friend and well-wisher of all living beings, Sudat Sarvabhutanam.
Knowing that formula, realizing that ultimate purpose and proprietorship behind everything is presented as the real path to peace.
It kind of takes the pressure off, doesn't it?
Yeah.
If ultimately the results of our work, our yajna, belong to the Supreme, who is our greatest well-wisher, it reframes everything.
It does, which leaves us with a thought to maybe carry forward. If the divine is the actual owner and beneficiary of all our efforts, from the biggest projects to the smallest daily tasks, how often do we really pause to consider that? To consciously offer the fruits of our labor instead of anxiously hoarding them or stressing about them?
It shifts the focus from personal burden and anxiety to a sense of contribution, maybe even surrender. A path not just to liberation later, but to practical peace right now.
Act with your best effort, dedicate the result, and find peace in the process. That seems to be the heart of Chapter 3.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Karma Yoga. We hope you found it valuable.
We'll continue exploring next time.
See you then.